Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we'll be talking or having a discussion about my predictions in terms of what classes are going to be perceived as the best in terms of tanks, in terms of healers, in terms of DPS, ranged and melee. And this video, instead of ranking them, we're going to make a 5-man group composing of all different covenants. On top of that, I'll also talk about some of my favorite pug classes to play with, because I know there's many people out there who do not have a consistent push group, but they like to pug high-end keys. We're talking 20 plus, and this video will try and discuss what classes could be very, how do I say it, in demand, because guys, you know, every time there's a new patch, people will try to, how do I say it, increase their chance of success. So they're going to be extremely picky in terms of who they get. There's going to be a lot of supply in terms of the people that want to get invited. So playing the right class can be very important. But a little disclaimer before we're gonna do any of this: you do not need to play a specific class to succeed in a plus 15 dungeons. You should be able to play any class out there, and if you don't get invited, pushing your own key is one of the best ways to get that weekly chest. And I won't be able to cover every spec in the game because the video would just be too long. I'll try and focus on classes that I feel are going to be either perceived to be really strong or are generally really strong in mythic plus environments. So let's go and start off with tanks, and this is Wowhead's list of the best covenants for a lot of the tanking classes. You can see here, again, a lot of this might change, but at this given point, this is a decent indication of what covenant is going to be strong depending on what role you're playing. So in terms of tanking specs for 9.1, I've been saying this for a very long time, guys, and you can go back to my previous videos. I've been pushing and saying that Guardian Druid is going to be the one. Guardian Druid is going to be picked up by all of these top end teams, and we saw some of this in the Great Push. In the Great Push, we saw a lot of Guardian Druids coming in because there's a couple of reasons why Guardian is just ahead of everyone else. The main thing is that Guardian is the tankiest of the tanks. That means you do not have to kite. Every other tank in this, maybe with the exception of Protection Warrior, especially with physical kind of damage profiles, Guardian Druid does not have to run away. Which means that your Elemental Shaman is not going to be cursing you out because you moved out mobs out of Earthquake, which means that Guardian Druid can face tank them more and do more damage. Guardian has a plethora of utility with things like Ursak Vortex, with Balras, and Balras is going to be very important because we're going to be building a class or a 5-man setup with different covenants, and this is Night Fate. And having a Balras is going to be extremely important for a tank. Guardian, in my opinion, is going to be the #1 pusher tank for really high keys, and it's also going to be one of the safest options if you're looking to pug as a tank. On the downside, a lot of people might consider Guardian to be somewhat stale or boring to play. It is relatively easy to pick up, it is relatively easy to do well, you don't need to kite as much. Incarn is insanely powerful, but some people might say it is a little bit more boring than other tanking specs. And my second favorite tank, especially in pug situations, and I'm gonna go against the grain, I'm gonna say Protection Warrior, because again, the same reason I said Guardian Druid. They're the second tankiest tank, especially when it comes to physical damage mitigation. For Protection Warrior, you can see a lot of different kind of covenants emerging. I think Kieran is going to be popular. You do see Necrolord kind of mentioned here, the fact that you can play Banner and be the support tank. I feel that's going to be more relevant in raid situations where you want to provide, that mastery bonus to others. You also get rage generation. I don't think there's going to be a lot of Necro Protection Warriors in Mythic Plus. I think there's going to be more of Kieran and Night Fate, depending. And again, my second favorite tank, Spell Reflect, pretty good, sometimes undervalued in a lot of different ways. Very easy to heal. If you're an extremely good Vengeance Demon Hunter, you know exactly when to kite. You have all of, you know how to track your cheat death mechanics either through your talents or through your trinkets. The cheat death trinket is really popular. If you know when to kite, if you know how to optimize your metamorphosis, if you know how to optimize your damage, you have to remember Vengeance Demon Hunter, even though they have to kite for so much, their damage is still insane. So if you're kind of the Vengeance Demon Hunter who's optimizing, who knows when to kite but also optimizes their DPS, you're going to be insanely great. You're going to be invited to a lot of keys. But on the flip side, based on my pugging experience, is that because Vengeance Demon Hunters have been such a flavor of the month class from the start of Shadowlands, so many people have re-rolled to Vengeance Demon Hunters who have no idea how to play. Vengeance Demon Hunter is actually relatively squishy, but the fact you don't see them one-shot because they have so many cheat death mechanics. So you see so many new players flocking towards Vengeance, and they're like, oh hey, I'm gonna go pull, dead. Oh hey, I'm gonna pull an additional mob, dead. Oh hey, I need a defensive, dead. These kind of players who just are not 100% sure how to play this class because it is relatively high skilled. Because, like I said, you might be kiting all the time, but in order to kite and optimize your DPS, it requires a decent amount of skill. Like a mob who is very easy to kind of deal with on a 15 might one-shot you on a 19. So you need to know when to kite, when you can face tank. I've come across more bad experiences with Vengeance Demon Hunters than good experiences. But if you're a god tier Vengeance, you're always going to be wanted. And just a quick mention for Blood Decays. Blood Decays did get a buff, and I feel they're going to climb in terms of, you know, popularity. But at the same time, I also feel Blood Decays, in terms of the damage that they provide, is really, really weird. The fact that Blood Decay, you can see the Covenant choices are just insane. You could have a Ventier Blood Decay and fit into a group better if you don't have a Ventier. And I think that's really, really cool. But at the same time, in my opinion, if you're looking to get invited in these pug situations, I think Guardian is going to be very good. If you're god tier Vengeance, you're going to be good. Protection can be really nice. Honestly, any of these tanks can be really good as long as you have the skills to pay the bills. Blood Decay, a lot of people will say is the most fun tank to play because it is so different. It is so skill dependent. Because if you miss a Death Strike, if you don't have a good management of Bone Shield and things like that, you're basically going to die. So, if you want a tank that's very different from every other tank mentioned here, Blood Decay. If you want a meta tank, I think Guardian is going to be your pick. Now we're going to go to the healers, and honestly, I've covered a lot of the healer videos on this, so this is not going to take too long, but in my opinion, you're going to have the same thing. In really high keys, you're going to have a Holy Paladin, and you're most likely going to have a Ventier Paladin, because Ventier Paladin is basically the choice for people who are going to do highly organized content, where everyone's going to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not going to be taking unnecessary damage, they're going to be helping you out. But in pug situations, I have to say this. If you're a pug leader who's looking to do a high key and you're like, hey, should I invite a Holy Paladin? If you're going to invite a Holy Paladin, you have to make sure that, hey, everyone's going to be playing well. You might be helping your Paladin in terms of, you know, off healing or something along those lines. Because if things go wrong in that group, Paladin cannot carry. Especially if they already used their Ashen Hallow, especially if they used all their, they used their wings, they used their Holy Avenger, and then someone takes unnecessary damage, or you pull an extra trash bag that has AoE, your Paladin is going to be screaming at you, hey guys, I have no cooldowns, that's it. So this is why I feel that in pug situations, I think Restoration Shaman is going to be viewed as a really good, safe healer. Now, what do I say by safe? Resto Shaman is not dependent on cooldowns, even though they do have cooldowns like Ascendance. Spirit Link is going to be great. The fact that Resto Shaman also has an interrupt can also really be an insane thing in pug situations, when how many times you join a pug where you have no idea who's going to interrupt what, and Resto Shaman having that backup interrupt probably saved a key in one or two occasions. And also, Resto Shaman can be Ventier as well. You're probably going to have a Holy Paladin who's going to be Ventier, and Resto Shaman could also be Ventier. There has been talks about the Kyrian, even though Kyrian has been nerfed, the DPS portion has not been nerfed. So we'll see if there's going to be Resto Shamans going for pure DPS, or maybe Resto Shamans going for Ventier, because you'll notice throughout the video, there's not a whole lot of Ventier meta classes. But I do have to mention that Discipline Priest, especially with that 1 minute Boon of Descendant build, and all of a sudden you have Boon every 1 minute if you hit enough enemies, I think that build could actually emerge to be quite strong. But the problem is, it takes weeks and weeks to actually unlock it. So maybe the community perception will already be locked in on that Holy Paladin and Restoration Shaman. And again, all the other healers, I can say good and bad things about them. I do wish Mysteries are going to get more buffs. I wish Resto Druid could see an interesting new build emerging in terms of Necrolord, in terms of single target DPS build where Resto Druids will be sacrificing their healing, because you have to remember that the new Tormented affix is not that healing intensive, with the exception of one lieutenant who's basically a Pride. And then there's another lieutenant who's basically a Bleed, but that's probably going to be cheesed by certain immunities. So all of these healers probably are going to be sacrificing their healing in order to go more DPS, because the healing requirement has just been severely reduced because Pride is gone. So expect some weird builds happening in the near future in terms of trinkets, soulbinds, and even covenants possibly. But my general consensus for really high keys, Holy Paladin Ventier. For community perception in terms of a safe healer in high-end pugs, I think Resto Shaman is going to be a pretty popular choice. So now let's go to the melee slot, and I have to say that melee slots in Mythic Plus are somewhat limiting. In BFA you had triple melee setup, and that was really popular. In Shadowlands you probably have a triple range setup, but I do feel there's going to be a lot more melee coming in, especially with the fact that Blizzard is nerfing these kind of affixes that were really annoying for melee, like storming. So I think there is going to be more melee slots opening up, but I don't think you're gonna go more than 2 in any given situation. So in terms of MVP melee slots for me, it's quite easily going to be from the start of Shadowlands, Windwalker, Monk, and a Rogue. Now, I think Outlaw is probably going to be the most popular option in here. The reason why I'm saying Outlaw is going to be, or Rogue is going to be extremely strong is because Shroud of Concealment. And we're going to talk about this very soon. But I want to talk about the kind of underdog Melee DPS that is going to rise to the very top, in my opinion. That's going to be Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc has, again, a lot of people will say that Havoc was actually, like, they'll tell you it's been terrible from start of Shadowlands. It really wasn't. You could actually do some of the world top Mythic Plus keys were done with a Havoc Demon Hunter in 9.05 or the start of Shadowlands. It's just that Havoc was so severely overpowered in BFA, and he got nerfed to be somewhat decent, but not the best of the best. And so many people flocked away from Havoc, even though it wasn't that bad. Now, I know there was a lot of issues in terms of single target DPS and things like that. You still had a guaranteed raid spot because you have to remember, Demon Hunters provide 5% magical debuff. But Havoc in 9.1 is getting substantial buffs, and I think it's gonna go back to being your top. Melee is gonna be back in being meta. It's gonna try and get your Windwalker spot. It's gonna try and get your Rogue spot out of the melee slots when approaching high-end Mythic Plus. So I seen a ton of Havoc Demon Hunters when I was testing Tormented 9.1. I mean, everybody's coming back to it, or at least a lot of people are considering to coming back to Havoc. You have to remember, I talked about this. There's always gonna be at least one Demon Hunter in raids. Just like there's always going to be at least one monk in raids. I should have mentioned that when you compare tanks in raid situations, it's way different. In raid situations, when you compare tanks, it's like, oh hey, we have a protection warrior tank, so let's go get a Windwalker monk because we don't have a brewmaster. Because you want to get your buffs. It's not about tanks being insanely overpowered or a tank being so far ahead of everyone else. It's more about how can we get these raid buffs for everybody. And this is why you're always going to have one Demon Hunter. This is why you're always going to have one Monk. Havoc is definitely the underdog that's going to make a comeback in 9.1, in my honest opinion. I think it's going to battle between Windwalker Monk and a Rogue. Even though Windwalker went through a roller coaster of emotions throughout the whole Shadowlands, because it's a class which is basically a bundle of bugs that Blizzard fixes one at a time, and when they fix bugs, they reduce damage, and they have to kind of buff them back up and things like that. But generally speaking, Monk is still in a really good position, especially with that 5% physical buff. The fact that they're Kyrian, there's not many meta Kyrian DPS out there, so being Kyrian is going to be a big portion of Windwalker's success if you want to get those Covenant buffs, especially if you're not running, like I talked about. Guardian is kind of Night Fae. So if you're not running, if you're running with Guardian, you're gonna want to get that Kyrian buff in some shape or form out of your DPS, ranged or melee. I should kind of mention Survival Hunters got considerable buffs, and I think there's always going to be some underdog streamers or high-end players who are going to pick up Survival and do some really high keys. We'll see how Survival is gonna do because I'm actually quite excited about them. But I think community perceptions is going to take a while before they're gonna be like, Survival could be the best spec in the game, but it could take literally months until someone picks it up and finds out about it. So the MVPs in the melee group, in my opinion, for 9.1 for high-end pugs and high-end keys in terms of community perception, I think Havoc Demon Hunter is going to climb. I think Windwalker is going to be in an extremely good position like it always was. And I think Rogue is going to be somewhat almost mandatory for a high-end key. And I think it's going to be Outlaw Rogue in a lot of ways. I think it's probably going to be Necro, because Necro is going to be very hard to pick out because you don't have many Necro meta classes, with the exception of maybe Resto Shaman going Necro. But generally speaking, Necro classes are relatively hard to find. Why am I talking about Rogue? And there's only one reason. There's many reasons, but the main reason is Shroud and Concealment. And let's go to the highly produced example of why. So guys, this is a map of Halls of Atonement, and you see these little kind of marks. This is where the lieutenants are going to spawn, or at least this is the last time I tested out Halls of Atonement. I did a bunch of Halls of Atonement keys. And this is where the most recent lieutenant spots were. This is your Frozen Boy, this is your Bleed Boy, this is your Fire Boy, and this is a Robot Boy. Before I was doing Halls of Atonement, the placement of these was way different. There was a Bleed here, there was a Frozen here, there was a Fire one here, and there's the Robot here. I'm not sure whether they're going to change every week because I was basically running the same kind of affixes. So maybe Blizzard is going to be changing them up every week based on, I don't know. But either way, what's going on if you end up getting these lieutenants here? at the very middle of the trash bag pool. You're not going to want to do the left side or the right side, the left side, and then after you cleared half the dungeon, you're going to kill these lieutenants and get these juicy buffs. Now keep in mind, lieutenant animal powers have recently, like a couple of days ago, have been severely nerfed. So I feel there's going to be a lot of people who might be either skipping them or completely avoiding them. If you have a rogue, if you have a shroud, you could just legitimately go straight to your frozen boy. Now for my testing, I was able to pull the frozen boy without actually having to chain any of these. So you could shroud all the way here, pull the frozen boy. Again, the frozen boy is not going to give you huge powers because out of the lieutenants, there's only 2 lieutenants that are actually going to give you throughput powers, and that is the bleed one and that is the fire one. These 2 lieutenants are going to give you powers that are going to either increase your healing by giving you more mana or just basically just DPS powers. Your frozen boy is going to give you something like you can eat faster. Your robot boy is going to give you something like, oh hey, you have an absorb shield, which in a lot of ways, I feel a lot of teams are just going to be bypassing if possible. So, if you have a rogue, you could shroud, you can kill the frozen boy, whatever. You have to kill it because it's kind of, you know, you want to get your way to the red guy. You kill the trash pack, you kill the red guy gives you juicy powers, then you go clear this side, then you go clear this side, and then you go kill the boss. This way you're optimizing the uptime of animal powers if you choose to take it. Now if you have a different version of this, and again this is just also Tormented, but let's assume you have the bleed guy here. Maybe possibly you could use Invis Potion or Shroud as close as you can to the red guy, get the red animal powers, kill these guys coming back, and then basically do the same kind of run that you usually would. The name of the game, in my opinion, is going to be optimizing the uptime of your animal powers if you do tend to kill them, because I have to mention they were nerfed very recently, so I feel you might even end up skipping it. You might, again, if you end up skipping some of these, having Shroud is also going to be extremely valuable. The value of Shroud has gone way up when you compare it to Prideful. And this is why I feel for really high-end keys, Rogue is going to be mandatory purely for Shroud on top of their other utility abilities. So this is why I feel that in the highest keys in the world, you're always going to have a Rogue. But at the same time, if you're running kind of a pug environment, I'm not sure if Rogue is going to hold the same value if you're trying to achieve or time a key. Because at the same time, I have to say that there is not a lot of rogues out there. I feel like the population of rogues is kind of lower since it requires, how do I say, a more organized group to make use of them. So I think in pug situations you can get away without a rogue, but in high-end keys you will need one for sure. Outside of the other classes, I do have to mention that Fury, and I know Arms is going to get a buff and things like that, but I feel Fury, if you're looking for one of the biggest pumpers in terms of pure damage, Fury Warrior DPS is insane. It's arguably one of the best melee DPS in Mythic Plus, maybe with the exception of Windwalker Monk. Windwalker can pump as well. But Fury is insanely strong if you're kind of fitting to that, you know, AoE cap pulse. If you're not pulling too much, I think in high keys, Fury damage profile is really well. But where they fall is their utility. And this is why a lot of the times people will choose something like a Rogue, Windwalker Monk, or Havoc over a Fury Warrior, even though Fury might do more damage, but they will definitely provide less utility in those high keys. And now let's go to the range section, and honestly the range section received the most changes because you had Balanced Druid nerfs, you had Fire Mages nerfs, you had a decent amount of Warlock changes, you had Shadow Priest nerfs. There's a lot of changes happening to ranged. And the number one thing is probably going to be Balanced Druid. Balanced Druid is going to go from like an absolute S tier mandatory in groups to possibly, do we need a Druid? Do we need those treants? Like the fact that Balanced Druid can go Ventier is an extremely good change. Because all of a sudden, if you go Ventier, you don't have to have Holy Paladin that's Ventier. You don't have to have Resto Druid or Resto Shaman that's Ventier. And all of a sudden, if Boomkin is going to be the absolute S tier, this frees up a lot of different options for healers. Because how many people play healers in 9.05 and they could just not get invited to that Wholesale Torment or Sanguine Deaths because you have to be Ventier, because you had Fire Mages, Hunters, you had Balanced Druids who are all Nightfang. Remember when Hunters were actually absolute meta? And we'll talk about that. I do have to mention that Balanced Druid Ventier is extremely punishing. So I'm not sure if every single Balanced Druid is swapping over to Ventier. It is very finicky and it's hard to optimize. So we'll see how that's going to go. And our Balanced Druid is going to be a Meta 9.1. And in my opinion, they're always going to be a wanted addition. Mainly because they have Force of Nature, because they have treants available. The fact that you have a 1 minute cooldown on something that's going to literally be your tank is absolutely insane when tanks are getting pounded. Now, if you have a Guardian Druid and they have Incarnation, the value of Treants is going to fall. So I think the value of Balanced Druid is going to be directly related to which tank you're playing. If you're playing a Guardian Druid who's literally invulnerable every 3 minutes because of Incarn, I think the value of Treants is going to fall a bit lower because, again, Boomkins did receive a certain amount of nerfs. But at the same time, when you look at Balanced Druids in Mythic Plus, you also have to consider that they're probably going to be one of the best DPS class in raids because of their spread AoE cleave. The fact that the last couple of bosses, including, Kel'Thuzad, including your Sylvanas, they have AoE that is relatively spread, adds that are all over the place, and that's Balanced Druid kind of the whole niche. So you might not be the best in Mythic Plus, but you're probably going to be extremely valuable in raids yet again. So I don't think Balanced Druids should be all that sad at this given point. I think it's still an extremely solid spec in the game. Now when we go and talk about Hunters, Beastmaster Hunters, Maximum Hunters, I want to talk about them for a little bit because you can see here a lot of them are going to be going Kyrian, which again, Kyrian can be kind of hard to find in DPS, especially in Mythic Plus. I think if you're playing a Hunter, I think you know what I'm about to say. They're probably the most mediocre class in the game. They're mid-table. They're not the worst and they're not the best. That's not a terrible place to be because you can still get invited in Mythic Plus, you can still get invited in raids. And I'm sure there's going to be some niche situations where Hunter is going to be really strong, especially in raids. But what makes it extremely salty for a lot of Hunters out there is that Marksmanship used to be the absolute top tier Mythic Plus build in the game when Night Fae or Wild Spirits was absolutely insanely overpowered. At the start of Shadowlands, every single Mythic Plus team would have a Marksmanship Hunter. Wild Spirits, absolutely nuts. Blizzard nerfs Wild Spirits. Blizzard fixes bugs. Again, one of these famous bug fixes that lowers the pure DPS of the class. And now Hunter, from being absolute top tier Mythic Plus class, goes to mid tier. I do think Hunters could use a sort of buff, especially being a pure DPS class. Let's move on to the next, and that's going to be Mage. This video is taking already way too long, guys. I really apologize. So Fire Mages got nerfs, but they're still looking extremely strong. It's very similar to what Holy Paladin. Holy Paladins got nerfs and things like that, but they were so far ahead of everyone else that basically they're still looking really strong for really high-end pushes. You still have a Fire Mage with that Night Fae. Night Fae being, again, a lot of people are picking Night Fae, as you already kind of saw. The thing is that Fire Mage has uncapped AoE damage, which is still very, again, when I say uncapped, there is soft caps to some extent, but uncapped AoE damage can be extremely valuable when you're trying to do these massive pulls to save time. I do think that there is going to be other specs of mages possibly emerging. Frost Mage with Ventier, if you don't have a Ventier in your group. Arcane Mage are kind of popping off right now in terms of pure damage as well. They have uncapped AoE. Arcane is looking pretty solid. And they're, again, Kyrian. If you're running with Guardian Druid, they have Night Fae. You have Arcane Mage to fill in that spot. Maybe you don't have a Windwalker monk with Kyrian. Maybe you're going to pick up an Arcane Mage. So that's going to be very interesting. I think if you're a mage at this given point, it is extremely fun because I genuinely think any of these specs could be used in high-end Mythic Plus content based on what Covenant you need for your group. But at the same time, I think Fire Mage, if played correctly with an organized group, would probably still be the best. But again, guys, this is still prediction-wise. I think Mage, super excited. And now let's move on to Elemental Shaman. And honestly, Elemental Shaman is going to be the Fire Mage of 9.1. So, what does that mean? What are you talking about? If you're doing a key in 9.05 or at the start of Shadowlands, if you did not have a Fire Mage in a high Mythic Plus key, people would probably say you're trolling. Fire Mage uncapped AoE was just absolutely insane. Like, Fire Mage will make hard pulls easy. It would make Pridefuls easy because Combustion has such a short cooldown if used properly. So, Fire Mage was absolutely mandatory for really high-end keys in 9.05, and I think the same is going to be kind of attached to Elemental Shamans in 9.1. Elemental Shaman was coming out as being the meta class in 9.05, and every other meta class in terms of range, your Fire Mage, your Balanced Druid, got nerfed. Elemental did not. So technically you have your Fire Mage, you have your Boomkin, you have your Elemental. Everyone else gets nerfed, meaning Elemental is the top. So this is why I feel the Elemental Shaman is going to be your #1 ranged DPS, possibly #1 DPS in general for high-end Mythic Plus keys. You can see Night Fae is also a very popular choice for Mythic Plus. You have to remember that Fae Transfusion also provides a good burst healing, especially if you're running with your Holy Paladin. They have no cooldowns and they're like, hey guys, we're approaching a Fire Lieutenant right now and I have no Ashen Hallow, we're going to die. Don't worry, I'm an Elemental Shaman. I'm gonna pop my Fae Transfusion. My Fae Transfusion is gonna do a bunch of damage and a bunch of healing, and we're going to be fine. On top of that, Elemental Shaman Earthquake is physical. So if you have your Windwalker Monk providing that 5% physical damage debuff on mobs that they hit, Earthquake, which is literally the #1 DPS ability by a mile as Elemental Shaman, is going to be increased by that. So Elemental Shaman is winning and winning. And this is why Ela is going to be the king in 9.1 if nothing changes. And the last one is going to be Warlocks. I'm not going to talk too much about Warlocks because generally speaking, Affliction received some changes that a lot of people are predicting that Destruction is going to be the #1 kind of king in raids. We're talking about raids. In Mythic Plus, honestly, I think it's going to be a similar situation where you have, hey, Warlock is absolutely mandatory. To some extent, they provide or can be viewed as Portal or Demon Gate bots, Hellstone bots in raids, and you need those. They have a guaranteed spot in raid situations. And in Mythic Plus, Demon Portals, I mean Hellstones can be really nice, but they don't have the same value as they have in raids. And the exact same thing in the opposite can be applied to Rogues. Outlaw Rogues or Rogues in general have Shroud of Concealment in Mythic Plus, which is absolutely insane utility, but in raids, you don't really care about Shroud of Concealment. But you have to say that Assassination Rogue single target damage is absolutely insane. So I do think there is going to be Assassination Rogues in raids because of their pure single target priority DPS. Maybe even Tyrannical keys. But their utility does not translate. And I think the same thing is happening to Warlock. Their raid utility is not translating in Mythic Plus. And I think they'll be viewed as mandatory in raids and pretty okay-ish in Mythic Plus. I don't think people are going to be like, oh hey, I need a Warlock to complete this key, but at the same time I think you're gonna have a good time. So I apologize for the insanely long video, but let's talk about a possible 5-man group composition which is going to consist of different covenants and possibly could be used by really high-end players to push keys. So I do think that Guardian Druid is going to be the most popular key pusher for high-end keys and pugs. I think Guardian is probably going to give you the best time if you're looking to pick up a tank right now, because hey guys, who wants to kite mobs? Let's be honest. So I think Guardian is going to be there. They're going to have Night Fae. I think in terms of high-end Mythic Plus keys, I think Holy Paladin Ventier is going to be the most popular option. Still, I think there's going to be a different option for pug situations. I think Resto Shaman is going to be the most popular or a really solid safe healer. But let's say Holy Paladin, Ventier, Guardian Druid, Night Fae. I think out of the DPS classes for Melee, I'm going to include 2. And this is kind of controversial, and there's a reason why I'm doing that. So I'm going to include an Outlaw Rogue, because Outlaw Rogue is going to have Shroud, and I feel Shroud is going to be absolutely mandatory for really high-end keys. Way more mandatory than it is during Prideful. I also think Windwalker is going to be here because of Kyrian. I'm missing Kyrian Covenant. Outlaw Rogue in my hopes is going to go Necro in this build. So we're going to have Outlaw Rogue with Necro, and we're going to have Windwalker Monk with Kyrian. And the last one is going to be Elemental Shaman with Night Fae. And this way, guys, we're going to have Elemental Shaman who's also going to benefit from Windwalker Monk's 5% physical damage debuff. We're going to have an Outlaw Rogue who's going to give a Shroud. We're going to have Holy Paladin who's going to give Giga Burst damage during Ashen Hallow, and also is going to be Ventier. And we're going to have a Guardian Druid. They're going to be Night Fae still, but guys, there's no tankier tank than Guardian Druid. And I think that could be a very, very solid build. Again, you can't pick and choose. Like, for example, what if you're not going to go Guardian Druid? What if you're going to go Vengeance Demon Hunter or something like that? Or even Prot Warrior for Kyrian? All of a sudden, you don't really need Windwalker Monk with Kyrian. You have a lot more freedom. Maybe you want to go with Fire Mage instead. Maybe you want to get a Balanced Druid. Again, this is a discussion video on building a group that's going to stick together. And also talking about classes that are going to be perceived as really important when you're pugging. Guys, I'm not an expert in all the specs in the game out there. There's probably a lot of things that I might have overlooked or I could have included. I didn't cover a lot of the specs. I missed out on certain tank specs. I missed out on certain melee specs. And I hope that it is very clear that you do not need a specific class to finish your 15s. And 15 is going to give you a max vault. Or that's all you need for that given week. So in order to get your max gear through Mythic Plus, you do not need to play any of these classes. And if you do struggle getting invited, pushing your own key is the best way. To get geared. Guys, let me know if I missed out on something. I know it is an insanely long video. I really do apologize for this. Guys, let me know if you like the content, subscribe and like the video, and I'll see you in my next guide.